Welcome again, everyone, to Afghanistan by Afghans. In this episode, we'll have a conversation with someone who looks very royal. That was my first impression, but he is a disciplinary artist. Does all forms of different arts, which we'll get to learn about him. Studied in Hague and now lives in Berlin. So I am very excited to have you on, Qeas John. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Salam, to everyone and to you as well. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. I know it's kind of late in the evening in Berlin, but not super late, right? You're not going to fall asleep during
It's
the.
never too late. It's never too late. The city doesn't sleep. It's fine.
I've not put anyone to sleep yet from my questioning.
That's good.
It's a good start. You may be the first.
That's
Well, first and foremost, I loved what you're wearing. Did you design it?
No, I had to represent. I actually bought this at an Afghan store like about 4 years ago when I went to London, and it was very randomly on I think it was Portobello Road, and I was like, "Oh, that looks very Afghan." And I went into the store. It was a full Afghan store with just everything and things that I never knew existed. And I was like, "I have to take something with me." It was overpriced, but I was like, "I have to take it with me."
I have to take it. Yeah. I asked that question because I know you do design clothing as well, right? I've seen some of the posts, or you're playing with clothes. I don't know. Do you design as well?
I've designed furniture, but not
Okay,
clothing.
furniture.
Although a lot of people think I do, but I just really wear other people's stuff. I think everything.
Yeah,
If I get to that right now, I won't mentally survive that. But
yeah,
maybe one day in the future.
yeah. You play
That's
around with
probably my
textile,
future.
that's all good.
And
Um,
we have amazing history in textiles as well. So
that's
there's
so
a
true.
lot that I can still learn from in that
That's
area.
so true. That's so. And
Yeah.
so, first and foremost, I just want to how I like to start is kind of understanding your journey
Yes.
from the beginning. How did your family move to Europe? Did you move to Europe? Did your family move there? Give us a
Mm.
little bit of background.
Yes. So, to go even a bit further, I don't know if you know the story of Sabo. So that is my grandmother's grandmother, who was the midwife for the king in Afghanistan in the 30s and 40s, and then her daughter took over, which then was the aunt of my grandmother, and then obviously slowly the war and stuff started happening and things like that. So my grandmother never really got to take over that role, but so we somehow were woven into that. And it's mostly the people who were living in Kabul who know about the story, because it was kind of like told to people as like a folk story, and it had some sort of a magic touch to it, because there is a myth that so my grandmother's grandmother, that she basically could tell by like touching the belly or looking at the female, how the baby was born, or if it had any like problems, or in which position it was. So you could say some sort of a form of empath she was, or even like some sort of like highly spiritual
Hmm.
something.
Well,
So I think that's a very important part with the family, because that kind of like ended up in how we generate for generations were living in Kabul. And my family from both sides is from Kabul, as far as we know. And most of my family, basically everybody except for my grandfather, was able to leave in 1991, just before um, just before
the
the
takeover. Yeah.
real bad war started there, yeah, which was in 92, if I'm correct. And so they all went to India first, which I think most Afghans did back then. And they stayed there for about, if I'm not mistaken, up to a few months, 6 months. And then they were able to come to Germany because, as you know, Afghanistan had quite relationships with Germany, but also my grandmother's brother was living in Munich. So it was my mother and her sisters who were able to come here first, and then a few years later, my grandmother came with the younger people, like the younger siblings, and then my grandfather was unfortunately wasn't able to leave then until after the Taliban actually were taken away from their position in 2001. But then to go back to Germany, so my mom and her sisters were here in 91 and kind of got married and stuff, and that's how she ended up in the Netherlands,
Hmm.
and I'm a product of that. And
That's wonderful. And you were born in Netherlands or Germany?
no, I was born and raised in Amsterdam. So, you could say on paper I'm Dutch in a way. But it's always very hard for me to identify with that because the first language I spoke was Dari at home, because my mom never spoke Dutch to me. She wasn't concerned about making sure that I learned Dutch, but more about our culture. So the first food I had was the Afghan food, the real actual food I had. And then the stories that I was getting was from there. So I feel much more, if you want to talk about identity, much more Afghan than anything, actually. I can speak Dutch, because I remember the first day I went to school, which was when I was four. I remember I could understand everything, but I couldn't speak the language yet because I never really spoke it at home. So in a way, it felt like you were an immigrant anyway. So that came in for me much later. So I consider, for example, Dutch my second language and my first language, whereas Dari is my first language, and then English and German comes on top of that. And so I grew up in the Netherlands, and then I was at 17. I was one of the fortunate ones to be accepted at the Royal Art Academy of The Hague as one of very young students, actually at 17, which is, in my opinion, looking back, way too young to be doing an art study, because you don't know nothing about the world, about thinking, about how your brain works. So it was a very tough study to begin with at that stage in life, but it has shaped me. And and I studied interior architecture. Had a lot of interest in that, and then from that point on, I realized also that we were learning how to come up with an idea or turn a thought or something, give it form, but we weren't really learning how to communicate from the product or the artwork on to an audience. So which then I decided to study international communication management, and I challenged myself by choosing to doing it, but by doing it in English, because I thought my English was good. Well, that was a surprise, but then it obviously improved much more. And with that study, I also learned how to close the gap from idea to an audience, which essentially has led me to what I'm doing right now. And
before you go further about what you're doing right now, I do want to ask a little bit more about what inspired you to go into the arts.
As far as I can remember, from a very, very young age, I've always been drawing. And I mean, it sounds like a cliche story, but I've always been drawing and, with watercolors, and I would always, I remember when when I turned 5 or 6, my mom bought me this little kit where you have your own tools in it. And I remember I found a random piece of wood at home, and I started sawing it and making a little boat out of it. And I would do this little craft stuff at home, and I knew that I wanted that I'm somebody that likes to create or do something with it, to create something or make something. And from that point on, I slowly developed into, because I went through stages of wanting to become a train conductor, but somehow, because I had some love for that, but then I wanted to design trains, and then I loved ships. I wanted to design ships, and then eventually I discovered my love for interior, because I think it was much more tangible at that stage. And but then through that, I discovered more the love I have for actually creating the furniture, and really giving a meaning to an everyday object that you maybe overlook, but creating something that brings you on the line between art and functionalities. So you might as well exhibit a salt shaker as a piece of art in your house instead of just putting it away. And I think from that point, that art's idea behind it is really what led me to focusing more on messaging through creation and creating, more so than functionality. So I kind of drifted away a little bit from the interior aspect, but that's all the story.
I mean, you have dived into so many different arts. I think you yourself are an art piece, because you definitely dress, like an art piece on all your photos, which is great. You're a walking art piece.
We have to represent,
yeah, exactly. What you mentioned your primary right now art practice. What is your primary? I'm sure there's multiple ones, but let's start with one.
Right. I mean, there's actually 3 or 4 which I primarily do, because they're kind of interwoven. I mean, I like to paint, as you can see here behind me. I'm working on something.
Nice.
It's hanging there. So I paint with oil a lot. I do digital collages, which I then connect with Afghanistan. And for almost all my artworks, I try to write poetry because it makes it easier for me to sometimes fall back on what I'm trying to say with it, but also it kind of takes away the question when people ask, what is it about? I just read this, and kind of still gives you also an opportunity to interpret my artwork, not only visually, but also through words. And if there's sound involved, then you can also interpret it in sound. But I try to write it in a way, the same way I create my artworks, where it's not very literal, but there's some sense of reality / surrealism. So you can still add your own perception to it without it being like my artwork you're looking at. But it's much more of a conversation starter, I would say. And also do performance art. So basically just doing spoken word of my poetry, because I figured I cannot sing, but I can do that. So that's the closest thing I can do.
That's wonderful. Maybe if you have any spoken poetry, I know we didn't plan on it, but if you have a few lines, we'd love to hear it.
Actually, I do have it here. There's something I wrote for Afghanistan. If you want to, if it's okay, can
let's
grab
hear it. Yeah, let's hear it. Yeah.
All right.
Let's get some improv going. Well, it's not improv because you've written it already.
I'm grabbing it. If I can find it.
No worries. Take your time. So while Qeas comes back, I want to take a few minutes that I put in this plug at the end of the show to put it up here now that there are more conversations in this series where we speak with other Afghans working mostly in art, but also other cultural aspects of life and so many other fields. And we have these conversations, and it's on an Afghan television where it's broadcasted. It's on YouTube and goes on podcast and all that good stuff. So surely check it out. And I hope you enjoy this one and future ones as well. So far, we have spoken with cultural advisors, multi-platinum artist, singer-songwriter. We've spoken with, I'm trying to think, activists, just the whole spectrum. And today we're speaking with an artist, with a multidisciplinary artist. And this is a treat. This is surely a treat. So go for it.
So this is something that I have not published or performed anything before so far yet, which I'm planning to do maybe later this year. But so I called it Lapis Daydreams at Night. So the lapis refers to lapis lazuli, which refers to one of our many gemstones that we have in Afghanistan. All right. So it's called Lapis Daydreams at Night. As light from the stars arrive at the night sky and serenade the evening by adorning its face, the hallways of darkness, hidden in the mind, start to disappear behind the bright curtains of thought, having its surfaces filled out with faint symbolisms of home, becoming sharper each time the sun falls behind the horizon, daydreaming at night in deep blue colors of lapis lazuli, until the early rays of dawn shimmer around the squared tiles of turquoise. That's one part of it.
Wow.
Thank you.
Very, very visual, and yeah, I could really visualize a lot of the words. Wow,
Right.
beautiful.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for sharing that, even though we didn't plan it, but that's kind of the whole point of doing this. Things come up.
Yes.
So
Thank you for
that's
giving me the
wonderful.
opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Of course, thank you for sharing. So now going back to following our conversation, so you went into the arts and you kind of explained the three sort of elements. So recently, of course, what has been happening. What are some of the pieces that you have been planning on doing? How has this whole new recent developments in Afghanistan, a country with which you identify with so deeply, what has that sparked for you?
So if I kind of go back to the beginning of COVID, that's where I kind of took a little slower pace, and I started to dive more into our own history, whether it was through which kings were ruling, what the names of the countries were, before it was called Afghanistan, to the architecture and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what I always noticed was that it was so difficult to find correct imagery for that, because the moment you type in Afghanistan, is only thing you find is just war pictures, which is also correct because that is a big part of the unfortunate reality right now. But there's also much more happening around it at the same time, and also before that. And I noticed that a lot of our imagery were very heartbreaking to look at. So I decided from that point on to take a lot of these images that I'm allowed to take and turn them into collages and artworks, so that especially with architecture, so that you kind of get to see it, that even though certain buildings are maybe not fully standing as the way they used to be, but they still have a story, they still have some magic to it. So I wanted to bring that to the front by adding those layers of the collages to it. And I've started doing that since then, but especially around August, when Taliban took over completely. I did an artwork where I was amplifying the women of the province of Hor, where they were walking through the streets with the guns, and that was really shared a lot within our community a lot. And so at that point, I knew that I can use specifically that form of art for me to quickly create, but also add a piece of information to the artwork where people can learn about it. And if they purchase it, a part of it will go to charity in support of Afghanistan. But also you get to learn something about it, and I've realized that for me, art is especially that piece of collages that I create for Afghanistan is my way of contributing to preserving the knowledge of our history, to continuing passing that on, but also contributing to what's already been created way before me. So this way, you kind of, because that, no matter whether you like it or not, we're always interwoven in our history. So why not take a conscious role in that, I thought.
Right, right. Oh, that's beautiful. I have seen some of the pieces that you've kind of done. I would love to like dig into. Have you released this new series that you're talking about? Have you published it online?
So
The
these I have
collages.
published online. So I mean, basically, if you go to my Instagram, I have another
Okay.
Instagram links to it, which is called Straight from Jupiter. And
Okay.
on that one is I post those, and I've been working on quite some new collages as well, which I'm hoping to start like releasing again, starting like now, Rose. So
Mhm.
let's say towards the end of March, where I also try to take stories that were shared about, for example, the women of Bamiyan who started to deactivate all the mines there, making it the first mine-free province in, I think, 2019 or 2020, early 2020. And so
Mhm.
those kind of stories, I think, are important to be remembered in these moments where it seems like everything is collapsing, that we still remember that our people, especially the women, were doing this, so that their roles are very important. And most of these women, for example, for that one, these are women who had gone to university and everything, and
Right.
they actually went to work and sent their husbands to go study. So I think that speaks a lot about the power of our women. So, and I think
Right.
those stories are very important to share through artwork, because especially being in a time where information, like there's an information overload, there's a lot
Mhm.
of things happening also in the world, so it's easy to get lost. And I think for
Right.
what is
Right. Right.
happening in our country, it's easy for us to feel like no one cares and things like that. So, and
Mhm.
imagery is a very strong way you can captivate somebody's attention, and by doing art, I think that's the first thing I can do.
That's true. That's
Yeah,
very
yeah.
true. That's very
Mm.
true. There's something you hinted at in the beginning of the show, but usually I like to take those sort of questions towards the end. Is the concept of
Right.
identity?
Yeah.
And that's that question I love to explore in the show as well. Because for people who are of mixed identities, born somewhere, brought up somewhere else, in a world that is constantly changing and shifting and developing in so many crazy ways.
Right.
Um, what is identity to you? First of all, how do you define identity? And then, of course, how do you place yourself there and define yourself as
Right. Right.
someone of a certain region?
Right. Right. I mean, it's. I think it's a very interesting space for the people to exist in, especially when you're in the diaspora, because you have the country where your parents are, so to speak, from. You have the country that you're born in, and then a lot of times you also have the added culture of the religion that is, let's say, you're born into or is placed upon you or that you choose to take on. So you kind of exist in the middle of all of that. So for me, for example, because I was speaking Dari first in the Netherlands, and then I learned Dutch, and then also on top of it, learning how to read the Quran and added to that. I was quickly learning how to jump between personalities or versions of myself within these like realities at the same time. And then obviously at some point for me, for me this happened when I was 22. You kind of get into some, not an identity crisis, but you kind of get tired of like jumping and like speaking different depths of your voice, even in the different languages. So you kind of have to make a decision of like, okay, like I cannot, I have to be the same in all of them, and it just has to work. So for me, it was at that age, but for me, it was a conscious decision to not search for myself, because I don't have to search for myself. I realized I am already in here. It's just that's a lot of layers that we have to deal with. So how about I peel everything off and then rebuild again and hold on to things that are that I agree with, and things that I don't agree with, I let go. So, and obviously you get a lot of pushback, or people applaud you, but that's just part of it, regardless of who you are or what you do. But that's just something that people have to adjust to. And I think once you realize that that's part of your journey, that you have to go through that uncomfortable stage of asking yourself, like, what do I actually agree with? What do I not agree with? Regardless of if you have been following specific things or not. And for me, identity is obviously the physical existence of my being, but I also know that my actual being goes beyond this life that I'm leading here, which I'm sure is also talked about in almost every religion, that that this body is a gift to us from God. So we're kind of like using it through this life, and then we give it back. So I think if you come from that sort of thinking, or even if you think about that, that the soul exists outside of the body at some point, that we're just here to learn lessons, and then you come back into a different version, etc. It all kind of has the same idea to me. So if you think from that point of view, then how you identify as a human being at some point almost becomes less important, but more about doing good and being well, but also knowing where you're from. So for me, like, no matter how much I will try to be Dutch and or whatever, the blood that is streaming through me is 100% Afghan. So all the people that have died and have helped to build that country, all of that from thousands of years, back, is some way woven in my DNA. So and the only thing I can do by honoring those people who have gone through those journeys is by honoring them. And how do you honor them? By acknowledging what has happened and what has been achieved, and that part of the country, especially of the world. I mean, especially when it feels like we're in a way being forgotten and we're being erased. So I think it's very important to think about that, and because no matter how much I will try to erase or not feel like talking about that, it's in me. So it's gonna trickle over, and the awakening will come to you when you're ready for you to happen. And for me, it was after 25. And for some people, much earlier, for example. But really wanting to dive into it, I was like, you know what? I realized that after I went through the whole self journey of deconstructing, reconstructing, there was always something missing. I realized, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And then when I went to Saudi Arabia with a friend of mine, and it was the first time I was in a country, and this was in 2020. This was the first time that I was in a country where everybody somehow felt similar to how I looked like, in terms of like, brown people, and that even though we didn't speak the language, but there was some sort of warmthness that was happening around me. And in my mind, I was like, I guess this is the closest thing I will experience to maybe that reality. But then I figured, or I can just go and search more about it, and find those communities and become part of those communities, obviously Instagram is an amazing platform for that, because all you have to do is just type Afghan and you get a lot of people who are also doing basically the same thing but in different forms, whether it's through music, through fashion, through their activism, and they're all over the world. So
Right.
it was nice to find that community, and I'm sure that's how we found each other as well, through Instagram. So
Right. Yeah,
so that's the beauty of that.
it's so interesting that you mentioned kind of the color of the skin as being a divider or a distinguisher. And I talked to different people in the diaspora, and everybody has there's it seems to be identity seems to be more of a spectrum, and people feel on the spectrum closer to an Afghan, closer to an Afghan American or Afghan Dutch, or in between,
Right.
or searching. It seems
Right.
to be kind of all over. And then the reasonings behind why people may feel differently could also be very different. In your case, it sounds like it was probably had to do with color of skin color, which is a major thing. There could be also other things. I was speaking with another episode coming up about a Muslim woman who wore the hijab. So for her, it was the appearance, uh,
Mhm.
and yeah, it seems like there are different reasons, and there's
Right.
a full
Right.
spectrum, and it's wonderful to kind of hear that from you.
Mhm.
There's one of the guests I was speaking with. She was born here, like fourth generation or something Afghan, but still felt that
Wow.
her identity belonged like the same way you went back like
It's
four
beautiful.
generations to
Yeah. Yeah.
talk about your grandmothers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so for you, what do you see as being kind of next projects? What are some things we can look forward to that you're working on right now?
So some of the
Um,
next projects, and by the way, just to go back to what we just discussed,
sure.
when I meant the color of the skin, also when you're in Saudi Arabia, even Arabs, they have like a full spectrum of light skin to really dark, and which identify with is because we have that as well. We have people who don't look Afghan, if you want to call it that way, to people who look super, whatever Afghan means to people, but like there is no really specific way of Afghan of
Yes.
people look Afghan, because we just have, it's a melting pot of all the cultures around it.
So
and
true.
and then I kind of was exposed to that in Saudi Arabia as well, so that kind of reminded me of the diversity within the people, but also just like seeing people that have similar noses to us, or similar texture of hair, or like just that specific tones, or the warmthness that we have in our language, and that we speak, for me, that I speak in Dari, they have in their language as well. So it was also those kind of like little hints of things that reminded me of a home that I had never been to, actually.
Hmm.
So that
Oh
was
yeah, yeah.
that
And you
was
have never visited Afghanistan yet, right?
no, no, no. And obviously that made me want to go back so much more. So I was like, if I learn much more about my history, then if I go there, it's going to be much more intentional as well.
That's
And
wonderful.
but unfortunately, whatever is happening right now is we're not sure
Right,
if
right.
how and when, but hopefully in the future, when this is taken care of, if we can say that safely, we can be able to, for all of us to go back and reunite
Mhm,
with our motherland in some way. But for
mhm.
the next projects, I mean, I've been writing a lot of poetry. I'm hoping to do some sort of spoken word projects, maybe, and somehow to record it and do something with that. But it's all in like up in the air. I'm always, for example, painting like the one I just showed you. Like that
Right.
one is empty, the other one is in the works. So I'm working on a new series, which is basically about. The freedom of like what society puts upon you, which is basically what I talked about, my own journey. But which I think is very identifiable for a lot of people. But also, I will continue to create collages which are linked to Afghanistan, and finding stories of people or architecture, or even just if it's just mountains or whatever, just to include it there. And hopefully someday I'll be able to turn it into a book where I can have like the artwork represent the stories, and then have the stories written next to it. But it's a I would say a lifelong project.
Cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I just hearing you is just wonderful. As I said, you look like a piece of art, and
Thank you
and you
so much.
inspire, and your work. I'm truly inspired every time I have these conversations. Feels like this is just a starting point. There's so much more to talk.
I know. Yeah.
But it was really wonderful having you on the show and conversing with you.
Thank you so
Kaisan,
much.
and I wish you all the luck and with all your projects, and I look forward to seeing them.
Thank you.
I hope if the audience is also would love to check it out, we'll put a link to all the stuff in this description. Check out Kaisa's work and follow the show. And thank you very much for being here. Thank you again, Kaisa.
Thank you so much for having me, and again, thank you for doing this and for giving us a platform to share our stories and have a platform for our voices. And I'm sure that it's going to help a lot of people from wherever they're from, and also to learn more about us. And yeah, for giving us a space to communicate all of this.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Kaisan. Thank you.